Thanks for being here. Not sure where to begin. Okay, James, you shot and edited the film, so I wanted you to maybe just start by talking about the very different styles between the first and second parts of the film. There's a very distinctly different visual vocabulary.
Okay. I also co-wrote it with Robin.
Yes. Oh yeah, maybe we should say what everybody did. Sorry, yeah. Since you didn't earlier.
Okay. I am a co-producer with these guys. Shot it, edited it, co-wrote it with Robin, and Robin's a producer, writer. Paul's a producer. So the question was like the distinct styles. So I guess like the movie's structured clear, in sort of three parts. The first part is there's sort of like I guess like a trick that's happening in a way that may or may not be evident. It's not necessary to like identify it, but the younger characters, Tyler and Anna, are never actually in the same physical space as the character Clip. They actually never met each other until tonight. And so the movie kind of moves in that sense from like a sort of like purely fragmented presentation to something that, in my opinion, is like sort of like the ultimate sort of natural, like potentially just like an assemblage of like raw footage on a tape, like a potentially found tape or something. So moving from like maybe complete artifice to like, the natural was sort of an attempt at least. Would you have anything to add to that, Robin?
No. We should probably say that all the actors are here. Maybe they want to stand up if they're all at the back. Lucy, Kaminsky, Emily Davis, Eamon Monaghan, and Michael Clip Payne.
Can you talk about for you, like this conceptual significance of shooting the first half that way, of not having the actors in the same space physically?
I mean, anything to say about
Obviously,
that?
this was something that you, at the writing stage, you knew this was how you were going to shoot it.
Yeah, it was written into the script, for sure, and that was sort of an issue of like pragmatism, in terms of how we could work with these actors. It actually is kind of the way that like Hollywood films work anyways, usually like the biggest star is sort of just like plugged in. And so in a funny way, it kind of has like the most fidelity to like the sort of aspirations of like indie cinema, I suppose, in a way. Did that make any sense?
So we could also just sort of give an overall, which is, so the first part, one of the big conceits, I think, of the film, and what I thought was really interesting, was the way in which the sort of means of production were kind of built into the script itself. So normally in a process of indie filmmaking or any filmmaking, there's a script, and then you go out and you try to find money, and that's, you try to make what is on the page on screen. But James and Robin had written this with Michael Clip Payne as in mind. They had thought of the locations, but it was to me, it was more than that. It was also just the idea that you could kind of you could make a really rich piece of cinema that was primarily dialogue driven, and that could kind of unfold as a chamber piece, and that's something that we could make within a year. That was the goal. And we pretty much shot this in about 5 days.
Spread out over a year. Yeah.
So you just alluded to indie cinema, which is also something that comes up in the film. It's referenced in various ways, and I'm wondering if you can talk about your relationship to this idea of independent cinema, and also how you were trying to engage with it in this film.
I feel like we all have like maybe sort of similar but different relationships to like so-called indie cinema. For me, it's maybe more the difference between sort of working as, I guess, like more of an artist or sort of more in a sort of like studio, like art studio kind of mode of production, where one assumes many roles and kind of just like makes things work. And so there isn't quite this kind of like sort of celebration of like this sort of traditional like top-down like delegated model. Yeah, so my work, aside from this, sort of shows in this sort of weird kind of like crevasse between like the art world and the film worlds. And I kind of like that, but it's also like a little, it's a lonely place too at times. Yeah.
Well, I think all of us grew up, kind of in the 90s and stuff, and when indie cinema became a genre in a way, and something that was kind of codified culturally, especially like through Sundance and these kinds of institutions. And so, what does it even mean today? It's such a sort of empty term. And I think it's interesting to sort of see what's happening in film today. Indie filmmakers want to make films for Netflix. What would have in the past been, a kid straight out of, I don't know, some film school wants to just, get a deal with Netflix or Amazon, and the landscape is just so different. So just part of the fun of this, in a way, was just like reflecting on the weirdness of this concept at this moment. Like, what does this mean?
But it always like moves in cycles too. I feel like every 10 years there's a new kind of like defining sort of indie movement or something, in which like personally I feel like the kernel of it is good. Like I agree with it. Like I liked Dogma 95 movies, for instance. But it almost seems like there's like this sort of like burning down of the house in order to rebuild it, but with the sort of the same kind of like aspirational sort of desires. Like the desires remain the same kind of, which is to like break upward into a world where you're like recognized as legitimate. And that's to bring it back to like the artist thing. I think there's a certain freedom in just sort of making work that's a little bit more less concerned with where it kind of like ends up and kind of like exists in its own moment, I guess.
I guess the other thing that indie cinema and these sort of independent movements, Dogma, American independent cinema, that I think they share is this obsession with authenticity, or the idea of authenticity, which is obviously a theme in this film. I'm just wondering if you can talk about the development of this idea in the writing of the film, this cultural, sort of fetish for authenticity, yet also this like, just almost like mutual acknowledgement that it is on some level impossible, and how that works with this other idea that the film brings up, which is appropriation. Maybe you can just...
that's a good question.
But
Any thoughts on this, guys?
what was this? What did you start with? Was it this idea of, I don't know, Knausgaard's words landing up in somebody else's mouth, or did you start with this idea of, because you've used appropriation techniques in your other work before, James? So I'm wondering if that was, how you started and then how you developed.
Well, I think one thing I can just sort of remember, like off the top of my head, is just how there's actually like a relationship between like product placement in movies and just like within the sort of like, let me back up how to frame this. I actually think almost of like the words that are used that are appropriated as being on the same level as, say, a can of beer, or like and like a bag of chips, or like when it becomes like at that level of material, for some reason that really excites me. And when it's sort of I don't know, stripped to these like very just like essential sort of fundamental that doesn't make much sense. Maybe you can. I think we wrote this together.
So you're going to answer
chime
it
in.
together.
I'm tired, to be honest. Yes.
Well, yeah. So okay, to back up, just maybe like very like just let's get into storytelling mode, I guess. Knarsgaard was has been very present, for like 20 years, and it really struck me. I actually kind of only realized this once we started like making the movie, that his cycle of like novels became bestsellers maybe like 15. There was like a 15-year delay.
He wasn't translated until.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
relatively
So like
recently.
his kind of current fame is, it's almost like he's living in the future, in a way. And so there was sort of this like built-in element of like nostalgia or something, and in the sort of like American or English-speaking reception of his work. And so by being around a lot of people who take literature seriously, I do myself. It was sort of interesting to like, I've never actually read that cycle, but to like have people around me like constantly talking about it, so like all these like bits and pieces, like I feel like I've read it in a way, and so
You've
just
never,
like sort of
you've never read it.
No, I haven't. So like almost like just by being a vessel of like appropriating through just being around certain scenes or something like that, and like what do you do with words that are sort of like just not rooted in something that in your own immediate experience, but like that was kind of like foisted upon you, and that's that. In that sense, that's how I would bring it back to words becoming sort of material, like a bottle of Ménage à Trois wine, or a bag of chips, or a few phrases from my struggle. It just gets jumbled. Yeah, I like that.
So how did you find this passage? You haven't just
The passage was, well, I knew I knew that I wanted to deal. I chose the passage, and then I proposed it to Robin. It was from the book that's shown, the childhood, the one that deals with his childhood. We knew that it needed to deal with childhood, but it was actually somewhat random. Yeah. That's true.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about, this is another sort of big question, but I'm really curious about the role that race and class play in this film, which is sometimes spoken and sometimes not, and it's implied, and it sort of just hovers over almost all the interactions and conversations, and I'm just wondering how you see that sort of connecting to your ideas about authenticity and appropriation.
I think to me, the important thing about authenticity is that it's always like about like finding a root, like an organic root to like childhood. So I think that's why childhood is so important. And like the film itself as being a film is like inherently fractured. So I think a lot of it is about clip existing in a filmscape, in a film world, that it feels a lot like a modern, just living in modern times where everything is like fractured and inorganic and doesn't have an organic, traceable root to childhood. And so like the kid and clip and all these things are kind of like undermined. It's almost like the Tyler and Anna like desire an authentic source for clip or for all these things, and they just don't exist. So I think that's kind of
and he's
a
like
big
literally
function.
inserted in that sense, right? Like he kind of, I feel like they look at him as just like for his like surface qualities, like
Right.
Yeah, in a way for me, like just to bring it to like the race question, I personally view the movie as, or rather the character of Clip, who happens to share the name as Clip, but it's a character. As he's just a guy. He's not like a white guy. He's not a black guy. He's just a guy. But his race is like weaponized against him, you know, like later, only when it's like, it becomes like a problem, you know, but they try to like play it off as like really like fine and cool up until that point. And in a way he's like been like just like dropped or airdropped into a kind of like maybe typical indie setup or something, you know. And that was a starting point with the script, is, you know, having making like the cliche of a car breaking down, a young white couple, like a creative class, like making sure we had like all these ingredients to like start out with, and then like inserting, like literally inserting something like foreign, I guess. Yeah.
I think one of the things when I first read the script that I think it immediately attracted me was all of the sort of slippages that are built into it that that sort of bring up a lot of these issues without ever answering them or kind of resolving them in ways that, you know, would seem like the appropriate way given the sort of maybe first 30 minutes of the movie. I think it was by the time we got to Act 3 when I was first reading the script, I was like, okay. You know, it became for me, it's like a existential film, and it all of those kinds of slippages that are built into it are kind of possibilities, and you watch these characters sort of grapple with a certain set of perceptions of their experiences, but you as the audience can kind of both relate to them, but also kind of see outside this sort of some of these larger patterns maybe taking place. But at the same time, it's sort of like a mystery without being solved. Kind of, that's sort of how I looked at the film a little bit. Like there was this sort of central question that's maybe not entirely resolved, but yet it's a complete film somehow.
Since you have the actors here, maybe you can talk a little bit about just casting. You have a mix of, I think, professional actors and I mean, Clip is a musician, right? Which is he's a member of Parliament Funkadelic, I believe. And so, can you talk about why you wanted him in this role, and also just putting the rest of the cast together?
Yeah, this is, I guess, on paper, it's Clip's first acting role, right? I believe. I mean, you can speak.
We could
to
ask
that.
him
Yeah.
if you.
Yeah.
First, yeah.
So yeah, like it was again. Yeah. I think the acting kind of exists on a spectrum as well, a spectrum sort of similar in parallel, I should say, to the structure of the movie. I mean, Clip was a non-actor until he became an actor in this movie, but a performer in life. And then Eamon Monaghan, who played Tyler, is an artist who acts. He also has a whole art practice. And then Lucy and Emily, who played the two women, are professional actors. And so it kind of moved, we intended it to move from, I guess, a place of, I don't want to call it like amateur, or maybe like amateur in like the most technical sense, you know, like not amateur as in bad, but just as just like non-professional. And then
it's also rooted, like, the boy is my son and the house is my son upstate. You know, so it's like rooted. It has this kind of internal documentative aspect where it flows out of like a real space, you know.
All right, I just have one more question, and we'll take a few from the audience. So you're all producers. You guys co-wrote it. You shot it and edited it. So what did the director do?
he just directed. We outsourced it. I mean, our collaboration is very, it's extremely, it's rooted in writing, and we've produced made a really long sort of like pseudo radio play that Robin wrote that I produced and directed and did all of that. But the roles are really sort of, at least I'll speak for myself, I should say, interested in highlighting are those of, for me, it's like writing and editing. I think that often the act of directing is sort of overblown. It's sort of just a necessary act, especially in a movie like this, and it was outsourced, yeah.
All right. we'll take a few audience questions. I think we have microphones as well, so if you raise your hand, somebody will come to you with a mic. No questions? No?
Film shot on one camera?
Microphone, sorry.
Did you shoot the whole film on one camera?
No, we shot it on 2, and the first part 1, the first winter, was shot on 1 camera, and summer was multi-camera, and they were shot on these on the camera that's cited in the movie, these Sony BVW series, like old Betacam SP that we bought off eBay, and it's shot on actual like new old stock, like unused stock, tape stock that we also purchased off eBay. And yeah, thanks for noticing that, actually, because there is a kind of, I think, like stylistic fluidity that shifts, you know, which was on purpose, using the multicam to kind of have like a live, like shifting, feeling more like a TV show, I guess, rather than like a very like rigidly edited, like first part, you know, that was shot with 1 camera.
How much of the dialogue was improvised?
None.
How much of the dialogue
I think we
was
all heard that, and that was
None.
answered. So we can go over back there. Yep. Back there, there's a question. Yep.
So just a 2-part question. So the choice to have the actors not meet each other, to have Clip not meet the couple, was intentional from the beginning, correct?
Yes.
So now, if the audience doesn't know that when they see that, and we kind of aren't given that background information later on, does that change the effect? Or I don't know, what is your thoughts about that in terms of, because I didn't realize that when I was watching it. I felt like it looked disjointed. I thought it's an editing style, but I didn't realize they were shot in different places. Is my experience different if I don't know that that was an intentional choice or not?
I think it's almost like a seed that you can sense. You know, you can sense there's like yeah, exactly, and that's inherent in the production, and it's kind of inherent in like often the way just society is structured. You know, where like people just, if you make a movie without money, you have to deal with actors having like disjointed schedules. Yeah, so you have to. That's almost just, you have to allow that to exist in the movie, at least in this case.
But the experience, though, being different, so yeah, it is different. I mean, but that's not, I don't think there's like one right experience or wrong experience. It applies to anything, you know? It's like if you know that like your neighbor is, I don't know, a furry or something, you know? Like that changes your experience, you know?
That actually might change
Is your neighbor
things,
a
but
Neighbor.
I mean, I think one of the big things that you know the actors told us is that it definitely changed their performances, and I think we talked about there being some kind of weird subliminal way in which it would register to audiences. Not maybe they wouldn't get that he wasn't in the same room, but just that there's something kind of odd, and it's the editing style, but it's also like the fact that you know, the actors are talking to, well, mostly Robin and not the characters that they're addressing. So.
Are we done? I can ask one more question, maybe, to wrap it up. So the film that you alluded to, that you and Robin made before, was The Republic?
The Republic, yeah.
Which is a film, people haven't seen it. It's a film without visuals. So it's
Well, there's visuals.
right. Okay,
but
without. Okay.
Representational image. Yeah.
Representational. Okay. And I think like one of the things that you were trying to do with that film, and I think in a lot of your work, is to question like what is cinematic, what is cinema, what counts as a film. And I'm wondering if there was a sort of similar like foundational sort of, you know, formal question that you guys were trying to work with in this film.
I feel like, because in the Republic started off, we were actually going to shoot it, like make a real movie, and we were in Woodstock, and it just kept falling apart more and more until like, we kept on like recalibrating our ideas about, how a film worked kind of, I thought. And we actually did a test shot with clip where we used him and the actress talking, and they didn't meet again. And I felt like that was like kind of it was like to me like a crucial lesson in like learning how to just accept reality and making a movie, and then it becomes so much easier. Because I feel like a lot of filmmakers, when they make movies, they have this like internal guilt about being poor, as if like them not having gotten funding is like a bad thing, and they feel stupid, and then they try to almost like make it seem like they had money in making the movie. So where the Republic is like the opposite of that, where it's a total acceptance of having no money, and I think that's how it comes out.
Yeah, like it's sort of like led towards like an essential form or something, I guess.
Yeah, and the Plagiarists is a lot like that. You're like, we have like $2,500 or so, or like whatever we have, and then you make the movie based on that, and whatever it is. But it's just about like embracing lack, I guess.
But the other thing one of the things I thought of when I saw, James made a film called Indefinite Pitch that came out, I don't know, like and it's essentially like a slideshow with a kind of voiceover text, and the text is really dense. And I remember at a Q&A, I think it was in Toronto, I don't know, like the images in the film are sort of black and white, and they're kind of beautiful, but in a kind of generic way. And you talked about like how kind of easy it is to make these kinds of images today. And I was thinking about that a lot in this film, because there's so much emphasis in images in film. And I think, and there's so many conventions in sort of like art cinema, and the sort of certain kinds of beautiful images have just been sort of cheapened. And I think we also are kind of like inundated with imagery in a way that we weren't, say, 15 years ago. So the question is like, how do you make a film that sort of justifies being a film that isn't reliant on a certain tropes of visual image making that are based on, kind of either they're very easy they're actually quite easy to make if you have the right technology. We could have shot this on an iPhone. But I like the idea that you can make a film and it actually doesn't matter. I mean, in this way, it does matter, this film conceptually. But I mean, I like this idea that you can that we're sort of, at this point in time, kind of free from the apparatus in certain ways. Because you can look at anything from Netflix to what's playing at Cannes or other stuff, and stuff looks the same nowadays a lot of the time. It's just an idea. I don't know.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here, and send our best to Peter.
Thank you.